Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today we've got a really interesting video for you because, well, it's based on what PC hardware you guys bought throughout 2019. I've been meaning to do this video for a while. A few holidays and other projects got in the way, but strap yourselves in for this one because we'll be talking AMD versus Intel market share, Nvidia versus AMD, which board partners are the most popular among you guys, and lots more. So when I say the hardware that you guys bought, I am of course referring to anyone watching our videos who has made a purchase through our Amazon affiliate links in the description of all our videos. A number of other channels have shared this info in the past, so I think it's our turn here as well. Amazon allows us to collect sales data. We can generate a massive report that has every sale through those links in there. And then, yeah, we can go through and create some cool market share graphs based on viewer data. Now, this isn't going to be comprehensive market share information. It's only based off Amazon US sales for viewers of Hardware Unboxed. This is going to be fairly representative of what our viewers, you guys, are buying, at least in the US on Amazon. But of course, that comes with all the biases of our channel. So people using our Amazon links are more likely to be enthusiast PC builders, more likely to buy stuff we recommend in our videos, more likely to be clued into what the best products and best deals are and all that sort of thing. We will also be getting a bit of a United States bias here. We know lots of you guys, around 70%, are not living in the USA, but as of right now, we don't have any affiliate links for other retailers. If you're interested, this is what a report looks like from Amazon with all the various items that were bought. It's not very exciting, it's just a huge list of products, the date of purchase, the amount it was bought for, and all that sort of stuff. No personally identifiable information, of course. But we did see well over 20,000 items bought through our links throughout all of 2019. Naturally, not all of them are PC components, but this is a really great data set, I reckon. In this video, we'll be covering 5 categories. We'll be looking at CPU sales, graphics card sales, motherboards, memory, and monitors. There's going to be loads of charts, so let's get this one started with a look at the all-important processor market for the 2019 calendar year. First off, total sales among our viewers. This one probably isn't going to be a surprise, but we see a strong victory in favor of AMD here, with 74% of sales going to Team Red throughout the year. Given we don't recommend many Intel CPUs these days, achieving a 26% share of sales isn't too bad for them, but clearly well down on what would have been the case before Ryzen hit the market. We can break things down further and look at each market segment. In the entry-level market, it's a complete domination by AMD, with almost no sales of Intel's Core i3, Celeron, and Pentium processors. At times, Intel's cheaper processors can be hard to find on Amazon, so this would influence the numbers here, but clearly AMD's Ryzen 3 APUs, along with a few Athlon CPUs like the 200GE, are much more attractive to those building budget rigs. This trend continues when looking at Core i5 CPUs versus Ryzen 5. This generally covers the $100 to $250 market, which is the most popular product segment, and we see very strong numbers for Ryzen here with 86% of sales. Intel's most popular part here is the Core i5 9600K, but on the AMD side, that part was outsold by all of the Ryzen 5 2600, 2600X, 3600 and 3600X across 2019 as a whole, and we'll go into a full CPU breakdown in a moment. The 2600 being at such a low price across the year did lead to significant sales and a huge boost for Ryzen 5 here. Things start to swing back a little when looking at Ryzen 7 versus Core i7. AMD still holds a 70-30 advantage in this market, mostly due to discounts for their 8-core Ryzen 2000 parts, as well as the introduction of Zen 2 products. Intel's main parts in the Core i7 8700K and i7 9700K were considerably less competitive after the launch of Zen 2, and that has hurt their totals here. It's the complete opposite in the Core i9 versus Ryzen 9 market, where Intel holds a strong lead. Intel's most popular CPU by far across 2019 was the Core i9 9900K, while Amazon and AMD struggled to keep their Ryzen 9 3900X and 3950X in stock. It's hard to say how these numbers would differ if those chips were easy to find on Amazon, but for now Ryzen 7 significantly outsold Ryzen 9, whereas the opposite was true for Intel's Core i7 and Core i9 lineups. When you group together both Ryzen 7 and 9 parts along with Core i7 and Core i9 parts, which represents upper mid-range to high-end consumer parts, it was a pretty even split in our data across the entirety of 2019, with AMD holding a slight lead here of 54% to 46%. Again, that comes down to strong sales for Core i9 9900K, really lifting Intel's performance at these price points. The data gets quite interesting when we look specifically at sales after the launch of AMD's Zen 2 lineup through to the end of 2019. While the 9900K was Intel's best-selling CPU among our viewers in 2019, 2/3 of those CPUs were sold before the launch of Zen 2. When the 3700X and 3800X came to market, AMD's 8-core, 16-thread parts outsold Intel's 2-to-1. Packing similar or better performance for the most part at significantly lower prices helped sway the equation towards AMD for a lot of buyers in the second half of the year. However, sales of the Core i7 9700K remained consistent despite Zen 2, so when we look at 3rd Gen Ryzen 7 versus 9th Gen Core i7 and Core i9, a battle of the 8 cores if you want to call it that, it's pretty even. This is a very intriguing one because you can sort of make a case for the 9900K. It still delivers the best gaming performance and holds up well in productivity tasks versus AMD, so you could justify getting 26% of all 8-core sales post the Ryzen 3000 launch. But the Core i7 9700K, we don't recommend this CPU. It's more expensive than the Ryzen 7 3700X and quite a bit slower for productivity tasks while being only marginally ahead in games. I think Intel's brand power is likely helping them out a fair bit there. When you throw all of AMD's 8-core and above CPUs into the mix and compare it to Intel's 8-core and above CPUs, AMD does achieve a 60-40 split in their favour, and again, I suspect this would be higher if the 3900X was more available. As for Ryzen 5 and Core i5 since the launch of Zen 2, well, it's a bloodbath in this market. The Ryzen 5 3600 and 3600X alone outsold Intel's entire 8th Gen and 9th Gen Core i5 lineups with our viewers at a 4-to-1 ratio. If we include the rest of AMD's Ryzen 5 offerings from their Zen and Zen Plus lines, this balloons out to a 9-to-1 ratio. Everything but Intel's high-end CPUs just aren't enticing buyers right now. AMD has both the performance and value crown in the mid-range, with plenty of offerings between Ryzen 3000 and older parts like the hugely popular Ryzen 5 2600. When we look at all sales for CPUs in 2019, the Ryzen 5 2600 is the most popular CPU overall, followed by Intel's Core i9 9900K. Not far behind is the Ryzen 5 2600X and the Ryzen 5 3600. We see surprisingly strong sales here for the X model chips from AMD like the 3600X, 2600X and 2700X. I suspect a lot of that comes down to pricing, especially for last gen parts. Seeing even sales for the 3700X and 3800X is also interesting, given we really didn't recommend spending the extra money on the 3800X. I wonder if that comes down to availability or people simply wanting the slight clock speed advantage of the 3800X or its supposedly better binning. AMD also holds 7 of the top 10 best-selling CPUs here. HEDT parts weren't big sellers through our Amazon links. The only CPU that saw sales was the Threadripper 2950X, which is a chip that we've been recommending for a while now. 3rd Gen Threadripper basically wasn't available to buy through Amazon at all during 2019, so it saw 0 sales. Intel's HEDT parts were available though, and not a single one of our viewers decided one was worth buying, probably for obvious reasons. Moving into GPUs now, and we have here the split between AMD Radeon and Nvidia GeForce GPUs, with a 58-42 victory in favour of Nvidia. This is a bit narrower than I expected, given Nvidia's superior brand presence and product stack that covers every price point, plus AMD not getting around to launching Navi until July. I assumed Nvidia might have a larger lead here, more in line with general market share numbers that we see. However, throughout most of the year, we have been recommending AMD graphics cards, particularly at key mainstream and budget price points. Then when Navi did arrive, both the RX 5700 and RX 5700 XT became our recommendations for around $400, and these buying figures are going to be at least somewhat influenced by our videos. So let's break things down a bit further here. In the $400 plus price bracket, Nvidia still holds quite a substantial lead, mostly because of Nvidia's much larger number of GPUs that cost $400 or more. Meanwhile, AMD only really had 3 GPUs in 2019 at that price, 2 of which were the Radeon 7, which barely sold, and the older RX Vega 64. Between $300 and $400, I was expecting AMD to do a bit better here thanks to the launch of their RX 5700 GPU. But instead, this is the most dominant category for Nvidia, with an 80-20 split in their favour. The RTX 2060 at $350 has been a huge seller for Nvidia, while the RX 5700 has only seen modest sales and came out much later than the 2060 did. AMD not having a solid option in this price range for half a year definitely has hurt them. In the hotly contested $200 to $300 market, AMD has again suffered from not really having a compelling product in this price category. The RX 570 and RX 580 are both cheaper than this, while the RX 590 took a while to become decent value. Plus, Vega 56 was rarely available around this price. Meanwhile, Nvidia has seen success here, particularly with the GTX 1660 and GTX 1660 Ti, which have been available for most of the year and have filled the price void of the previous champion, the GTX 1060. However, there is a huge swing in the budget market. At below $200, AMD is dominant in our sales data, holding an 82 to 18 advantage over Nvidia. This is entirely down to the RX 580 and RX 570 offering excellent value for the entirety of 2019 and getting our strong recommendation over Nvidia's tepid GTX 1650 series. The 1650 saw almost no traction among our viewers as it launched offering poor value in comparison to AMD's older Polaris GPUs. What about if we compare AMD versus Nvidia since the launch of both Nvidia's super GPUs and AMD's Navi at the start of July in some key battles? Well, the first one here is quite interesting. At around $350, buyers are consistently choosing the RTX 2060 over the RX 5700, with Nvidia getting 64% of sales since July 1st. We generally recommend the RX 5700 as it's the faster of the two cards, and when pricing is equal, the better value product, so it's unusual to see this sort of strong difference in favor of the 2060. However, Nvidia does have a stronger brand. AMD's Navi GPUs were plagued with reports of driver issues around launch, and when the two cards were selling for around the same price on average in our data, the 5700 only being 10% faster, that sort of margin is probably small enough for many buyers to stick with the green team at this price. We also didn't review as many RX 5700 models as we did with the 5700 XT, so that's probably affected the click-through of that sort of product. However, the situation is very different when we put the RX 5700 XT up against cards in its price range. When compared to the RTX 2060 Super, RTX 2070, and RTX 2070 Super, the RX 5700 XT takes the crown here, gaining 66% of all sales. A lot of this will come down to the sheer volume of 5700 XT reviews we did covering most cards on the market, so that will be skewing the data a little bit there in AMD's favor. At the same time, it seems buyers post-July 2019 weren't that interested in buying a $400 to $500 GPU from Nvidia. The RTX 2060 Super saw dismal sales at $400, which isn't too surprising as it launched at worse value than the RTX 2060, and about a week later, the RX 5700 XT was offering 15% more performance at the same price. When tossing up between these two cards, it seems that Hardware Unboxed viewers did flock to the 5700 XT. The other interesting thing to see here are the sales for the RTX 2070 Super, which was the better value super product, and that shows with better sales. However, at $500 and only offering slightly more performance than the RX 5700 XT, it seems you guys weren't enthused with that sort of value proposition, with only 17% of buyers looking at spending around this amount of money, opting for Nvidia's Super refresh. When looking at overall data, things are even more dismal for Nvidia's Super line, which simply did not get any traction among our viewers and wouldn't have been helped by tepid reviews. At a guess, it looks like buyers waiting for an upgrade did so earlier in the year with a non-Super Nvidia card, products like the RTX 2060, which launched this year, and older Turing GPUs like the 2070 and 2080 all sold pretty well. But the Super lineup just wasn't offering enough of a performance or value upgrade for many buyers. Even cards like the 1660 Super, which was decent, still fell near the bottom of our sales chart. Meanwhile, the 1660 Ti is a surprise inclusion up near the top, the second most popular card of 2019. People really love buying cards around $250, and even though the 1660 Ti was perhaps a bit high on the price side, we did give it a positive review. AMD had no competition at this price point until just a few weeks ago, and that was enough to see it sell well. Other products like the 5700 XT, RX 570 and RX 580 are pretty obvious choices, so it makes sense they'd also be right up there in terms of sales. And let's not forget the partners that bring us these cards. Nvidia buyers preferred to purchase MSI and Gigabyte cards, while surprisingly ASUS wasn't a major consideration. I think other brands having a bigger presence on Amazon has swung people to the often reasonably priced MSI and Gigabyte cards on the site. For AMD GPUs, the AMD exclusive partners have a big presence on Amazon. XFX and Sapphire were the most popular, with PowerColor in third. Perhaps a bit of a surprise to see the big three usual GPU manufacturers not gain a lot of traction here, although we did tend to recommend cards from Sapphire and PowerColor, while XFX had some of the lowest prices. Let's move now into motherboards. Given we saw AMD dominate our CPU sales figures, it's expected they would win the motherboard category too, and that's what we see with buyers going for AMD chipset boards 62% of the time. However, this is lower than their CPU sales share of 74%, which does make sense given buyers upgrading from Ryzen to Ryzen don't necessarily need a motherboard upgrade, while Intel buyers making most sorts of upgrades do. Among high-end boards, so we're talking Z370 and Z390 on the Intel side, and X470 and X570 on the AMD side, Intel-based boards did outsell AMD-based boards 55 to 45. Z390 is naturally Intel's best-selling product. Unlike their mid-range boards, it supports overclocking and is basically a requirement if you're buying Intel's most popular CPU, the 9900K. X570 also saw good sales, but not quite to the same extent. Meanwhile, on the mid-range front, AMD dominates here. As you can overclock on B450 boards, and for lots of buyers this is all they need, we see a huge 9-to-1 advantage here for AMD, presumably as Ryzen 5 buyers flock to these products. B450 was nearly as popular as Z390 overall, but not quite. This does play out as well when looking at the high-end mid-range split for AMD and Intel. Those needing an AMD board make a 50-50 choice, slightly in favour of mid-range, but really it's quite even here in terms of people's choices. Buyers have more choice with AMD boards and seem to be taking advantage of that based on the sort of price points they're after. Intel, on the other hand, is dominated by high-end board purchases. Again, given people are only buying high-end Intel CPUs right now, grabbing a Z390 board as well makes sense. The single most popular chipset, as I mentioned, is Z390, with B450 not far behind. X570 also saw a good amount of sales. Again, I suspect that skewed a bit due to our extensive coverage of X570. X470 comes in fourth, with buyers after a high-end AMD board choosing this before X570 hit the market mid-year. Looking at board partners, overall, the number one choice for Hardware Unboxed viewers was MSI, helped significantly by their B450 lineup, including boards like the Tomahawk, which sold like hotcakes. In keeping with MSI's mediocre X570 lineup that we covered in our videos, they only placed third for X570 sales, behind Asus in first and Gigabyte in second for that chipset. MSI also came second for Z390 boards. Second all up was Gigabyte, which was the go-to brand for more than half of all buyers after a Z390 motherboard. Their Aorus lineup in particular was extremely popular. Asus comes in third, very strong sales for X570, and ASRock unsurprisingly sits fourth as the smallest of the major motherboard players. The breakdown does shift a little bit when we look at AMD partners, where Asus elevates to second, but they fall back down to third when viewing Intel boards. We didn't generally recommend Asus Z390 boards, and I think this shows here. For memory, I was most interested to see what sort of kits people were buying in general. While Hardware Unboxed viewers overwhelmingly choose 16GB kits, with 73% of sales going to this capacity, mostly in 2x8GB kits. Given most gaming rigs are fine with 16GB of memory these days, this isn't a huge surprise. 32GB was the next most popular and was twice as popular as 8GB, which does signal the death of 8GB builds, which is good news as 8GB really isn't sufficient for gaming in 2019. For brand, again we have an overwhelming favourite, Corsair, with nearly 60% of all memory sales. The lead here was so dominant that Corsair actually sold more 16GB DDR4 3200 kits than any other single brand sold DDR4 as a whole. G.Skill came in second, often quite a good value choice, with other brands bringing up the rear. I was surprised to see Team Group fall so low here, given they often have quite attractively priced memory. For speeds, most people opted for DDR4 3200, given these days the price premium over 3000 is negligible, and with Ryzen being popular, this sort of speed is good for both second and third gen CPUs. 3000 was also very popular though, while the more premium 3600 kits, which may have been attractive to Zen 2 system builders, didn't sell in any sort of outstanding amount. Lots of people are also bizarrely interested in DDR4 2666 and 2400, even though it's not that much cheaper than 3000 and Intel builds still benefit from fast memory. Lastly, let's take a brief look at monitors, which is one of the most popular categories for purchases through our Amazon links. In terms of display type, the number one choice for people buying a new display in 2019 was 1440p high refresh, seeing 42% of sales. Next up, as a more budget offering, was 1080p 144Hz with 35% of sales. These two categories alone made up 3/4 of the monitors you guys were buying, and we do have a gamer focused channel, so gamers wanting these sorts of panels does make sense. Both categories have also seen much cheaper monitors released in 2019, which I think has helped considerably to drive sales. The next most popular were ultra-wide 3440 by 1440 displays with a healthy 10% of sales. I think again driven by some of the very low prices we see for 100Hz options these days. Bog standard 1080p 60Hz is also moderately popular, while 4K hasn't seen much traction at only 3% share of sales. Super high refresh 240Hz monitors also aren't on the radar for most buyers. Our breakdown of brands has been heavily influenced by our monitor recommendation videos, which are some of the most viewed videos on our channel. The top two brands here, Viotech and LG, have consistently featured in our recommendations for their excellent value. Products like the LG 32GK650F and Viotech GN24C have sold very well, probably based on us saying they're good. Acer and AOC also have some of the cheapest monitors in any given category, so they too feature up near the top. Looking over the monitors people bought, Asus was the go-to choice for more premium monitors, while Dell's Alienware brand was particularly popular among ultrawides. MSI has jumped right up into calculations too, only launching their first few monitors a few years ago and grabbing a 6% share here today in 2019. And that's all the data for today's video. Pretty interesting insights into what you guys have been buying, the brands you prefer, and I guess, yeah, just the stuff you're interested in. Based on these numbers, we also get a good look at the most popular PC build of 2019, which would be an AMD Ryzen 5 2600 on an MSI B450 motherboard, paired with an Nvidia GeForce RTX 2060 graphics card, also from MSI. For memory, it would have been 16GB of DDR4 3200 from Corsair, and the monitor would be a 1440p 144Hz unit from LG. To me, that sounds like a really sensible mid-range build with great bang for buck, so I guess it shows that you guys are making some good decisions based on our recommendations. That's it for this one. As always, if you enjoy our content, find it interesting and all that sort of thing, it's worth subscribing and hitting that bell icon so you don't miss any of our upcoming reviews, coverage and analysis, all that sort of thing. If you want to support the channel, we do have our Patreon page, links in the description below, as well as our merch store if you're interested in stuff like t-shirts, mugs and hoodies. Yeah, interesting data. Really enjoyed putting this one together and analyzing all the stuff from our Amazon feed. We will be back again to do something like this when we have a bit more data throughout the year. And yeah, that's it for this one. I'll catch you in the next one.